So, Professor Mooney Simmie, the way Professor Conway finished there, it felt like a but, and I'm supposed to come in and say, so, distinguished guests, colleagues, students, friends, family, and particularly family. I know that Professor Mooney Simmie, that her husband John is here with us today, and I think her two sons and their partners, so Sean and Sabrina, and Donal and Sienna, and their three grandchildren are here for the lecture today as well. Let me see if Arabella, Keane, and Rory. So you're all very, very welcome to the event, and I think we have some guests here as well. I think Mark Hederman from Glenstall is with us this afternoon as well. So it's wonderful that you're all here. It's a really special occasion. And I think that, it's a particularly special occasion. It's a celebration of Professor Geraldine Mooney Simmie's career. And so obviously it's a celebration because it involves an intellectual exchange, which is wonderful in itself, but it's also an acknowledgement of that career and a celebration of the career. I think that inaugural lectures and events like this are synonymous with university life because they speak to intellectual leadership and scholarship, but they also then, and the contributions that have been made to knowledge. And they also are an opportunity then to look forward in a particular discipline. Where is it going? What are the next steps? What do we need to do? So it acknowledges our achievements and contribution, and then it also is prospective. It looks forward. And more broadly for me, that inaugural lecture of this kind, where we're celebrating a professor, it's also a celebration of university life and universities as repositories of knowledge exchange. And as I get older in life, I brought two books as well. This lecture is not about me, in case you think this guy is he's just about to take off in a lecture. I'm not. I'll be finished very quickly. But actually, to give meaning to this, and actually to ensure that I do this as properly as I can, I'm very interested in philosophy and legal philosophy. And throughout my career, I taught two courses: evidence law and legal philosophy. You don't want to hear about either, but actually, one of the books that really interests me is a philosopher from Australia who went to spent most of his life as a professor in Cambridge, and he asked himself one big question, which was, what are the basic goods in society, and universal goods, essential basic goods? What are they? So, and he came up throughout his career. He came up with 7 basic goods, and he believed that legal systems then should protect those basic goods and ensure that they're embedded. But some of those basic goods that he talked about, which couldn't be derived further, one of them obviously was life itself and the intrinsic value of each human life. I think we'd all agree with that. But the second was knowledge and knowledge exchange. And so the pursuit of truth, knowledge, sharing it and so on, because none of us, no matter who we are, would vote to be in a state of ignorance. And and so he spoke kind of a lot about that as an essential basic good that needs to survive and be protected in a society. And interestingly, another basic good for him was sociability. So how we live, and we're all interdependent on each other, and it's a recognition of that and working together. And the others then were more legal, practical, reasonableness and so on. But we're celebrating many of them here today: knowledge exchange, sociability, life itself, and also practical reasonableness, because when you're pursuing truth and when you're trying to move discourse on in a particular discipline, then that's what you're doing. So I just, when I think about an inaugural lecture of this kind where we're celebrating Professor Mooney Simmie, I'm thinking about those basic goods as well, and the importance of university and universities in social life. And sometimes we forget about that in the busyness of every day. And itself, when we think about that knowledge exchange, we're thinking about the purpose of truth, the power of truth, intellectual curiosity, research innovation, and then that idea of helping other people excel through that knowledge exchange, and intellectual freedom itself. And never before has it been more important, that idea of intellectual freedom. The idea of giving academics political freedom or intellectual freedom in itself is a political choice. And it's the freedom to speak, it's the freedom to criticize, to hold the mirror up with impunity, and to say what you believe and what you think in good faith. I think it's a really, really important part of the democratic process. I think it's really important in universities, something we should value and continue to protect. We're doing it here today. And so I think that's important. And to Professor Mooney Simmie herself, a professor of STEM education, a director of EpiSTEM, a national centre for STEM education in this country, studied at the University of Galway, chemistry and maths, higher diploma, masters, PhD from Trinity College Dublin. A deep commitment to education and the powerful transformative force that education can have. Again, we spoke to that in terms of knowledge exchange. Her focus on equity, ethics and democracy, which, and the extent to which it can frame education policy and practice. But also her focus on a feminist lens and a decolonial lens to educational research, and the impact that that's had. So not only in teaching the teachers, but then how that impacts across secondary school education in this country. So as director of Epistem, she has led a vibrant team in STEM and STEAM, creating a really good and strong community of scholarship around her own research expertise. She's upskilled over 2,000 teachers, and the cascade impact of that, I think, is very significant. She's an expert researcher as well for the European Commission, and again, helping to influence and shape EU policy on topics such as green and digital transitions, but also on sustainability and inclusion. And I think that STEM itself, and it's something that she's often spoken about, is central to Ireland's future. I think one of the things, and it's the reason I brought the second book just as a anecdote, but it's we talk about the women in STEM and the powerful emancipatory impact that that's had, and our country leads in Europe in terms of STEM graduate rates, and it's because of people like Professor Mooney Simmie and the colleagues and the team that she's built around her. But I was thinking about that in terms of STEM. That words like that and our graduate rates, they trip off the tongue. And the reason I brought this second book was, and it's not related at all to her work, but it does speak to gender. I was looking at something recently about the Garda Police Act of 1958, which allowed female Gardaí into appointed for the first time. And in the Dáil, as the legislation was going through, a deputy got up, Deputy Sherwin, and whilst we're advocating for female Garda recruits, he said the following. This is actually in our Dáil records, that while recruits, quote, should not be actually horse-faced, they should not be too good-looking. They should be just plain women and not targets for marriage. Now, when I read that initially, I actually thought that this was a new criminological phenomenon, that the deterrent effect of hiring ugly women, okay? But of course, what that actually referred to was the marriage bar. And so in 1973, and the argument was, you hire recruits so that they'll stay in the force. If they're married, you're going to lose them as a resource. And that was the thinking. Now that's one generation ago. And so the reason I gave that, and it's just an anecdote, and I can't speak to Professor Mooney Simmie's research, but I can speak to the impact. And so when we talk now about that as a country we lead in Europe in STEM graduation rates, that is down to her work and so on, the emancipatory potential of that and the feel of it, which is not that long ago. I've given you that stark juxtaposition of a phrase like that being quoted in the Dáil. It shows you how far we've moved and how quickly we've moved as a country. So, she continues to kind of champion this idea of new thinking, new pedagogical approaches around STEM, particularly around ethics, equity and ecology. So for her work, she's connected strongly with the university's strategic goals, particularly about fostering academic excellence, driving research innovation, engaging with society and in addressing societal challenges. So this lecture here by her today is to honour her as a really powerful scholar, to acknowledge her dedication, her commitment and her leadership. And I think what it does is it embodies the best of the academic tradition. And I think that, as I mentioned to you at the outset, one of the basic goods, which is knowledge exchange, and she champions that. So, Professor Mooney Simmie, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much. How to follow that now? Tá an áthas a bheith an tránóna all in show. And thank goodness it is such a lovely day. I was expecting, high currents and winds and rain and everything. So it's wonderful. It is a great celebration today of my work, but it's also a celebration, I think, as well of my life here in the University of Limerick. And I want to share some of my story to share with you, I suppose, where that vision and values has come from and the journey I'm on as myself as an academic. And I really, I suppose, when I think about cultural politics of education, that is something that has grown over the years, that I've understood that we always need to ask the question, who benefits when any new fandangled idea appears in policy or a reform is handed to us. So who benefits, we must ask the question. And it's a 360-degree question. And Micheál O'Sullivan said to me when I was working first, learning how to do critique, Micheál O'Sullivan said to me, make it a 360-degree critique. So you've got to critique yourself as well as whatever's out there, and you've got to be reflexive and critically think. And so you've got to get to the heart of the matter. It's something I do love to do, to get to the heart of the matter, but know that it isn't a finished business, it's a work in progress. And my friend and colleague Mark Patrick Hederman, who often came and spoke to the students and worked with the tutors here, would say to me, take up the red biro, Geraldine, but take it up to the system and never the people. And that saved my life and my bacon many a time, because I enjoy my colleagues from whatever walk of life they come, whatever research focus they have, because we have a wonderful, expansive field in education, and we have people coming at education from different worldviews and different perspectives. And I'm saying, as director of Epistem, bring it on. Let's have lots of different worldviews. So what's worth fighting for in STEM education, what's worth fighting for today in general education, and of course then that feeds into the topic, which is teachers' positioning and their practices. So all of my research can be looking in at how the teachers are positioned and their practices, whether they're in a classroom situation or whether they're in border crossing partnerships with others. So what is our superpower, I think, at the university? And I think Shane has mentioned, our president has mentioned some of our superpower there, that intellectual prowess that we need to bring to our work, and we need to rethink about what we mean by education. It's changing rapidly around us. There's another political and economic upheavals that's going to result in new economic crisis, and it's going to result in new curriculum reforms coming at us at speed. And we're, like my son Donal often says, we're like in the locked room trying to find the key to get out. So we've got to find, obviously, new ways and new approaches to rethink our way out, so that we keep the human at the heart of it, and that we keep a humanising discourse at the heart of it, because there is a strong tendency to make everything deterministic and hierarchical, and to have it all pre-packaged and all done in advance. So all you have to get the teachers or teacher educators to do is to kind of follow the prescription. So what is our superpower? And that idea then of our academic freedom. And academic freedom is a huge responsibility. It carries with it an enormous weight of responsibility, because in a democracy it means, obviously, being the social conscience of the state, whether they might like it or not. So I'll tell you something about social dancing in a few minutes, and growing up in Lisdoonvarna, and how we might dance along with the policymakers in a way that we can keep that openness for new thinking. So I'll tell you, if you want to buckle in and get on your safety belts, we might take a bit of a flight. The day is good. We can get out over the River Shannon there and just up over the Living Bridge very nicely, and we'll hopefully get up to some northern lights maybe before the weather forecast is good enough. There won't be too much turbulence, I think. But I do want to tell you a little of growing up in Lisdoonvarna, the help I had in the school, and Mona Hines, the principal of the Mary Immaculate Secondary School, is here with us today. Tell you a little bit about that and how it shaped how I think and how I feel and value education, and the importance I place on knowledge and wisdom and ethics and equality. and equality, and that includes social and gender equality. As I tell my story, I don't want to forget, for example, one of the nuns in Lisdoonvarna, who became a great friend of mine in older life, knocked on the door of the classroom when I chose chemistry for Leaving Cert, and she said, "Come out," she said, "come out of there," she said, "that's the subject for boys, and come down the corridor to my geography class." And I was stubborn. I was the 7th of 9 children, so I was nice and stubborn. And I said, "No, I think I'll stay in here for a little while longer." So I've been in and out of 4 different universities in Ireland, so I have a tale to tell. So my mother and father, Stephen and Hilda Mooney, met in a dance in Cricklewood just before the Second World War started, and they reared 9 of us without an income, without a steady income. We had a lodging house and a guest house in Lisdoonvarna, but there was no wage and there was no salary coming into the house. So there was a material poverty, but there was a richness in lots of other ways. But the material poverty is there. So in all the work I do, the social class and taking care of people from poor backgrounds and making sure we have a decent society for everyone is there, and it just comes from my background, and I know it does. I'm here with 2 of my younger brothers, and we all learned how to put our arms around our plate of food. Because with 5 brothers and 3 sisters, you didn't mess about. So, of course, Lisdoonvarna itself is the old Victorian spa town with tourism and with a fantastic culture of visitors coming from all over the world and serving breakfasts and doing all of that. We had values and dreams and knowledge, and we had a wonderful school in Mary Immaculate where they taught us Shakespeare, science. I got to do honours maths because a guy down the road was coming back repeating, and they plucked me out and allowed me to do honours maths with him as the first girl to do honours maths in the school. So we had all those wonderful values of care and seeing the person and the presence of the person, and that understanding of relationship as being about presence. So all of those values and dreams were there, but Sister Rosari McGuan from Corrafin was my science and maths teacher, and she could make, oh my gosh, all the maths and science just flew. We could understand it and love it. But she was a very careful and, I suppose, a frugal nun as well. She could take out a bottle of hydrochloric acid and bring it to the bench and lift the lid and just tell us what it would do to the bench if she put a drop of it on, and then put it back on the lid again and put it back into the press. So I don't think the nuns in Lisdoonvarna really ever had much chemical, it might be I better not say it too loud here in case the accountants get on top of us and make sure the chemicals don't get used up that much. Tom Tarpey from Ardrahan taught us Roman history, Latin and politics, and about being civic-minded, and he got people in the village to work as a mehel. So they taught us music, they taught us guitar, they taught us all this without ever money exchanging hands. It was all volunteering. And so we were brought off to speak to the county councillors and tell them how North Clare should be run and everything. So those are parts. So when I'm interested in philosophy and politics and culture and religion and education and them all in that big, lovely ontological and epistemological soup, if you like, that's where it has arisen from. So problematizing policy studies is what I ended up doing my PhD in Trinity late in life. I worked with Seamus O'Bucala, who had been an inspector in the department, and I worked and finished my PhD with him, and he said I was going to be his last student, and his first one was Professor John Coolahan. And he put me into the library and down into the basement reading all the policy statements from all the ministers and reading all the history going back 50 years to try and get a handle on education. So that notion of social and gender inequality is built into me from my childhood, from the way I've lived, from my life. And UNESCO now in 2021 invited us to have a new social contract for education. All of the more recent UNESCO documents are asking for that. Very interesting. the Science and Innovation Policy by the OECD, just published this year, is inviting us to expand our thinking away from only the pipeline of talent, and to actually think about how we might generate and develop good citizenship, and how we might take care of the planet, because it admitted that for the last 10 to 20 years that it has been just simply focused on the pipeline of talent and the economy and growing that. And this is an OECD report called Science and Innovation Policy. So I'm delighted to work with the European Commission, even though when I did get the invite, I said to them, like Bob Dylan, I don't think it ain't me, babe, you're looking for. When I was doing my critical and feminist critique, I'm calling it an affirmative critique, because I think the responsibility on me is not to critique out there without critiquing back here, and also having to offer alternatives and alternative theorizations as well, and to rethink about how we might make this world a better place. One small anecdote I'll share with you, because I've often said, well, when did I first get that buzz for researching and framing and reframing and thinking about topics? And Tom Tarpey was the editor of our local magazine called The Beacon, and we sold it outside Mass on Sundays once a month. And he went off to Spain on 2 weeks of a holiday, and he left me as the editor and said, you'll take care of everything, Geraldine. And I thought, gosh, this is a great opportunity. I can write an editorial. So I found some of the girls in my class were not coming to school, and I went off to find out why they weren't. It was September, and the festival was going well, and the bachelors were coming into the town to catch a wife. And so they were all working in the hotels, and I discovered that they were working 7 days a week, £7 a week, 7 days a week, and no day off, and they weren't allowed to come to school. So I thought, I've got a complete fabulous editorial here. So he came back from his holidays, and to make a long story short, all the hotel owners called him in and wondered how come this article got published. And so cleverly he called me to his office, and he said, well, I don't know what we're going to do, Geraldine, he said, with this. But he said, look, we have a choice. He said, you can put an apology in next month and make an apology. Or, he said, maybe you could go and get some evidence and make this article stronger. So you can imagine what I did. So I was one of 9 growing up in Lisdoonvarna, and now I'm now one of 9 again with my own family, the Simmies, who are here with us today, and they're very, very welcome. And our dog Banjo isn't with us today, but she's at home waiting for us when we go home. So it's a delight to be here today with the family. So just a little bit about that journey. Having been the first, again, of the family, as the 7th of a family of 9 to get to university in Galway, and now trying to tell the nun that I was good at chemistry, I went on and did an honours degree in chemistry and a master's by research in chemistry, as well as doing a minor in mathematics. And so I was ending up 7 years in the university in Galway with the Clare County Council grant footing the bill, and my brothers and sisters in London paying for my keep, because I didn't have to work, because they all sent a cheque, and they were working in London, and they'd send a cheque home to me, or so actually it'd be cash would fall out of an envelope so I could stay studying. So for that I'm deeply grateful, and I've often done a talk for Donogh O'Malley's family because of his courage. And I've said I would love to think we'd have ministers with Lee Rogie into the future that would actually have that courage to come out and do things like that, because he never went to the cabinet to ask their permission. He went to the cabinet when it was all over and the Sunday papers had carried the news. So for a number of years after that, I worked in the JES in Galway as a science and maths teacher, teaching physics, honours maths, chemistry to transition year. And at home at night, I wrote chemistry papers and junior science papers, and had 10 students enter the Young Scientist every year. And there's a medal tucked in there somewhere from some engineering college in the States, where two of my students got second place in Ireland on a research project they did in science. So that was all in there in the space. And the next part of my journey then was I was invited out by the department to do to offer some chemistry in service to teachers working on a secondment. It'd be about 6 days a year, and I'd have cardboard boxes in the boot of the car and all the chemicals in the boot of the car, and I was going around doing all the demonstrations. And really there wasn't that much health and safety. We had and I just had to be very careful when I put my stuff down on the bench, because often when I did these kind of talks with my gas syringe experiment, there'd be nothing left at the end. If I looked around, half the equipment to be gone, because the equipment and chemicals were in poor supply in the schools. And of course, I did have a connection to a university then, and Dr. Peter Childs was helping every chemistry teacher in the country. So I would have known Peter at that time. And the first time I think Tom Geary might have seen me in here was with a white coat on me doing a chemistry experiment for the teachers. So that was another great experience. So you'll have to guess who that is. I'm talking and Micheál Martin is taking down some notes. I did the best part of 10 years supporting transition year in the west of Ireland, and between people getting sick and ill and different things happening and being moved here and there and being a member of a national team, I actually ended up in every county from Cork all the way up to Donegal. I think 13 counties I counted at one point getting in supporting transition year. And Maura Clancy, the chief inspector, you say to me, you know, the Chinese say you teach that which you need to learn. And I thought, gosh, I better go home and think about that now. I was across the curriculum, in and out, meeting French teachers, woodwork teachers, every teacher from every subject. The woodwork teachers impressed me the most. They were all relaxed, chilled. They had, you know, sawdust, everything nice around the place, very easy going. And I was thinking the Irish teachers were pulling their hair out trying to teach Irish to the teenagers. But the woodwork teachers they were giving these fellas saws and chisels and hammers and everything, and not a bother. They were chilled out, no safety statements at all going on. So we had a transition year, and I ended up having a transition year and supporting a holistic program. So Micheál came along. He was the Minister for Education. He came and spent a day with us in the Blackrock Education Centre, listening to what we were finding around the country. So I had a wonderful experience with that. And after that, I decided that I'd like to do the PhD in Trinity. And then from there, this is the next 20 years of my life, working with academic mentors and working into the space where the University of Limerick is roaring down its head at me saying, come on, we need a few quartile one journals, Geraldine. And this is all fine, bringing in this experience. But we now need that experience to turn into academic cachet as well. So Seamus was a wonderful guide to me for my PhD, but I do remember fondly being brought to the coffee shop. He'd bring me to where the old Dons used to have morning coffee in those olden days, and he'd say to me, they came in and had coffee and a sherry in the morning. So we'd go there and have a coffee, no sherry. I worked with John Coolahan in Maynooth for a year, great support. Explained that a PhD would integrate all your life and you'd find out all about yourself. Oh my goodness, that is too much, that is so true and not so great, all of it. Joanne Moles was the person who was here today with Pete. Lovely to see you, Joanne. Joanne and myself have started a journey. We've walked on it ever since, producing papers and working and arguing about the TOS, about the purposes of education, and we worked on a mentoring program for many years, and 'twas Joanne helped me do the interpretive work. I said, I've got all this data brought in, what do I do with it? Please help. So Joanne, it was a great help. Manfred Lang, I worked with then for years in a European project and eventually worked with 14 different countries. So I began to get a flavour of the bigger picture of education. And of course, when I was with Seamus, I did a comparative study between Ireland and Norway. And I felt you've got to go away to come back to see yourself for the first time. In a way, the same way the journey of life. You've got to get out there and fall flat on your face and come back and know yourself for the first time. So in a way, going off to Norway after I had the PhD done, I realised, sure, I know nothing about Norway by the time I'd finished it. So I had to make it a minor part of the dissertation. Peter McLaren was in critical pedagogy, loved all the work, went to China with him, learned all about asking the critical questions, but also felt that there's something more needs to be done here. So Jane Martin from the University of Birmingham, who was the editor of Educational Review, I suppose found me at AERA at the Chicago conference. She followed me along the corridor and said she wanted to hear more of what I was saying. And so she introduced me to feminist studies and feminist readings. So it's, along with my academic mentors, I think I have also two very spiritual academic mentors that have guided me as well. Because when I grew up in Lisdoonvarna, I discovered that culture was such that education was trying to conserve culture and heritage and to make space for the new. But it also made space for philosophy, theology, history, sociology, science, the arts, the humanities, the deliberative traditions, the many ways of looking at life. So it wasn't just one narrow way of looking at life. So you'd colonize education if you only were going to look at it with one lens and you were going to keep that deterministic and tight. And so the beauty of the complexity of that education and its complexity, the beauty of having that light shining through, is that we cannot have it all described and all prescribed. So we were delighted to have John O'Donoghue here, who I grew up with in North Clare and who kept us on our Celtic spirituality journey. And he's here, of course, with Tom Geary. So lovely to see you, Tom, here today with us. And with Patricia Mannix McNamara here as well, and myself and Joanne. So he was a great influence on me around that inner journey is a soul journey, of a spiritual journey. It's not so much a self-evaluation of yourself as a product in the marketplace. It's a journey in to get to know yourself as a person in the Shakespearean sense, to thine own self be true. And then Mark Patrick, so much wonderful work written, as well as his generosity to come and speak with the students and be with us and talk about being animated by spirit and the spirituality that we need now to be able to have that metaphor of dancing, whether they're with dinosaurs or whatever they're with, that idea of social dancing. We need to dance with everyone, the corporate world, we need to dance with policymakers, we need to know that to dance with people out there in the public space. But the question is, how do we do the interaction of all of the different knowledge and the ethics and the aesthetics, so that we don't actually end up inside little tight ivory towers where we can actually make a difference. So all of those influences have helped to bring me to the place where I can say hand on heart that I'm interested in the cultural politics of education. Whose world are we educating for and who benefits? And when we look at the reforms that are happening, that we are immersed in culture. Education is relational and a social process. Camera to camera is helpful. It's great to have camera to camera, but you cannot beat being in presence and being able to work in presence with people. And it's full of paradoxes and full of spaces. So that wonderful thing about STEM and STEAM education and general education is to have all of that intellectual prowess of all of that knowledge, but to know what to do with it, to be able to ask the ethical questions, the aesthetic, the big ethical questions. So really to understand education as a perpetually open ethical question. And then everything else fits in there. So you bring in your knowledge, your politics, your culture, all of the rest of it in there. But it is an open ethical question because it changes depending on what century we're living in and what time in the world we're living in. So to keep the openness is so important. Not allow it become a reductionist, deterministic type of space. And then where do you draw the line then between the state, the society and the culture is the work of critical sociology. Where to draw that line is the important question, Because if the line is drawn too tight, the state walks right into the classroom and actually shuts down our pedagogical space, the autonomy of the teacher, the judgment of the teacher, gets shut down. So where to draw the line? It's not that you don't need accountability. It's not that you don't need the sciences and the mathematics and the engineering. It's not that you don't need the arts and all of the important multiple disciplines that education is, but you need that little illumination and space for the traditional, for the deliberative traditions, Bildung and the immeasurable and all of that. So without going on too much about it, I will say for me, a huge one that anchors me, what anchors me most is understanding from Martin Buber's work in the philosophy of relationship, understanding that the I, thou and the I, it must be a both and. So if you've only one, you're probably, well, if you've only one and it was I, thou, maybe you're Mother Teresa with no needs at all, and you're amazing if you're only one. But if you're only I, it, then you're actually only seeing the person as an object of your research and your study, and you're just gathering the data and doing the work and gathering the data, and you're doing something quite functional and quite instrumental. So it is for education, it must be both an I, thou and an I, it. Of course, that's in our personal lives as well. We have needs as human beings that need to be met, but we also need to love one another beyond commodities. And of course, I don't need to explain what love by being a commodity and an I, it is about at all. We all know, we can all know what is the art of the deal. So we all know what it is to actually live in a world with the I, it approach. Intention, instruction, interaction, outcomes, measurement, results, data. But unless we have the I, thou, the attention, the presence, the dialogue, the trust, the care, the immeasurable, then we don't have the joy and the immersive frisson, as Joanne would say, going into that while swimming, that frisson you feel that you don't want anyone to measure or to come near you with any kind of a measuring tape. So that care work, of course, that might often be from the feminist point of view, might actually always have been reduced as work that might be seen to be needed, but just someone else could do it. So that's the importance of that. So that kind of rips through. So now University of Limerick is roaring at me, come on, Geraldine, let's get some academic papers here and some books and papers. So I said that divided into 3 phases. I brought my Pied Piper of Hamelin there as my symbol of my academic work of being able to do affirmative critique that brings in the philosophical questions. I found it in Charlie Burns one day when I was tearing my hair out because I'd got another rejection from a paper, and I was thinking, where am I going to put this? So dividing that 20-year time into, I suppose, 3 phases. I suppose the first phase was completing my PhD, writing book chapters, going to conferences, working with 4 European projects. And what they were all about was teacher professional learning and teacher in service. In a way, it was putting the academic hat on what I had been doing all my life, which was working with experienced teachers, and like Maura Clancy had said to me, be the agent provocateur and trying to provoke and challenge as well as support and scaffold. And so I was working with that, working with understanding the cultural dynamic of working with people, and working with also wanting to say not only the pipeline of talent and that being important, but also our own soul world, and also the external world of being citizens, and also just saying, lying around and enjoying the space of being alive. So with Joanne and myself, we worked with our mentors and we theorised productive mentoring. We started working, bringing out the autonomy, the localised autonomy of the teacher, trying to respect that. But we would equally challenge those teachers to have their hand on the research and the literature and be reading and be thinking and being reflective and being caring and all of that, but not thinking that they were doing anything other than having a dialogue and being present with the young people that they were teaching, the importance of that. And so the Pied Pipers of neoliberalism coming into playing their tune in the education system then started to come as I started to read around, I suppose, the way our liberal education had become a neoliberal hybrid. And that hybrid had become a global capitalist network, and that had fed into education as a global education reform movement. And it fed in very tightly, and it was beginning to be very attractive to the academic researcher, because our brain, with our science brain anyway, and wearing that science brain, we like to systematize things and to come, and we have that need for a right answer as well as the right question. And so that was attractive to get the what works and go after it. So the academy divided between people who really were going after what works and the data and the metrics, and those who were giving the argument back that it was relational and it was more than, and we were pulling it out and expanding it. And then the feminist researchers were expanding education out, as were the critical thinkers. You're all too young to remember a program I grew up with, a thing called Get Smart in the 1960s, where Get Smart used his shoe and put his shoe up to his ear to answer the call, so he would go out and solve the problem. So I was invited to examine a PhD in Lancaster, and it was a student who had written a PhD on the smart student living in a smart school and in a smart city. And it was his thesis showed how you could be microchipped, and if you followed the instructions on the microchip and looked at your watch to check were you breathing, and you did all of the rest, that in fact you would now be educated according to this deterministic approach, and you'd be following that. And the smart student was going to be self-regulating, motivated, adaptive, responsive, and tech-savvy. But there wasn't anything in there about you being in relation with others, or in relation with non-humans or humans, or in relation with the planet, or anything. It was about being this competitive, private good, and off you get the good and away you go. Give me the lecture and off I go. So it was education as the customer. But of course we understood it, because from the 2000s onward, the capitalist network, I suppose, understood that they wanted education as a for-profit business. And you can't make something a for-profit business if you actually can't make it a private good, and make all the problems associated that people have as private, because as some famous politician once said, there is no society then. So the public good, the public cultural values, all of that has gone. So another PhD I got around that time, I got a call from a Professor Paul Standish, a philosophy lecturer in the University College London, and he invited me to examine a philosophical critique of evaluation as it was happening in Ireland and in the UK and in the Europe in the moment. And it was a Jean-Paul Sartre evaluation, showing it was really in bad faith, because it had a set of rules, and it was a bit of a jig and a reel about how you were going to do this, and that you were going to be proving that you were doing what the system was looking for. So this dissertation was saying, where was the existential growth and development of the teacher, and where was that bigger picture about the relational and us, the human condition, being a condition in relation. So I was delighted to be invited to examine that. And then Professor Sybil Ergeran, when she was director of Epistem, invited me to join a group of researchers, a good number of them. There was 15 researchers, and about 8 of them were philosophers from the United Kingdom, Northern Ireland, and it was looking at STEAM education from the British Education Research Association, and we wrote a report which BERA published then as reviewing this potential of STEAM education, and that was actually about how we would bring arts-based pedagogies into STEM education so that we would have social justice and gender justice. So that social domination, being interested in that was a very big important thing for me, because it was who benefits, how do you do it, how do you give the teacher the freedom to be able to teach and use multiple pedagogies as opposed to giving them the deterministic prescription about what you want out all of the time. So they led to my third phase, which I'm calling it, being able to offer conceptual and methodological offerings in the academy. I had found my tribe, and they were a mix of people from critical pedagogy, feminist studies, and philosophers of education. So Joanne and myself wrote a paper then on putting the soul of the teacher to work for the principle of the market or for facilitating risk. We were looking at teachers changing subjectivities, and what we were looking at there was, again, that argument about the deterministic approach, or was it that the teachers were actually having to do personal development. And from that early part, about a decade ago or 20 years, if you study the research and if you study the policy, you won't really find the word personal development written anymore about teachers. It'll be professional development, politically inspired, following reforms, but you won't find that they have personal reflexive work to do. It may be a reflective practice about what they're doing in class, but not a big unearthing of their own self, what Bourdieu had called that idea of making sure they didn't do symbolic violence when they were teaching. So we moved on to critical studies, produced a paper on what we thought of good teaching as being a very messy narrative of change with all those policy networks, and how much support we needed to give the teachers in schools. Seamus O'Bukala used to say to me, "Geraldine, it'll be more expensive than putting any man on the moon." But of course, we know no system was going to put that kind of money into the continuing education and generation of the teachers. However, Joanne and myself and the team and all my colleagues here in the School of Education, we did end up having about 300 different teachers qualify in productive mentoring, working in an intellectual space with us, studying the literature, doing the reflexive work with themselves, and publishing in papers and chapters and books and going to conferences and all of that. I worked with Sylvia Edling then in Sweden. We continue to work together on looking at that bigger picture of the democracy, the public interest values. What does that mean nowadays? And how does education have to think, and how should it change? And what should we do in the science classroom, in the mathematics classroom, and in the engineering and technology classroom that will make for that better citizenship? Because scientific knowledge nowadays, we're in a complex and scientific and technological world. It's no longer science for the privileged. We have to say, how would we make good citizens now in the science classroom? And an uncritical appreciation of science doesn't strike me as the best way to do it. It would strike me, and that's really as far as our policymakers have gone so far, an uncritical appreciation of mathematics and all these subjects, all very well and good, but we also need critical thinkers, and we also need to know the power and the limits of STEM and STEAM. So to be able to play and have the intellectual prowess of being able to play with the subjects, to be able to have the upskilling in knowledge, and to be able to keep the real world applications, and also to pose those important ethical questions, the importance of all of that. So we looked at what was the STEM or STEAM or teachers' democratic assignment. What is that? Because if the teachers feel that they don't have any democratic assignment, that it's nothing to do with them, it belongs to somebody else, then we really surely don't have a democracy, if they don't think at all that they have any democratic assignment. Educational Review carried a paper conceptualising teacher professional learning. Again, this is a lifetime's work, being able to bring it to that space and look at that as a cultural endeavour imbued with transformative possibility. So widen, broaden, complexify education rather than allow it be reduced and brought to a narrow space. The gender piece has always interested me. It's a very complex question. I'm no expert in it, but I did do a study looking at the gendered construction of policy, and I think nowadays a lot of governments, what they do with gendered construction of policies, they think, well, we'll call it gender neutral, and that means we don't have to get into that awkward subject at all. But at the same time, the policies, when you read them with a kind of a gendered lens on, they're talking, you know, a very muscular discourse. It's about just data and stats, and it's just a very muscular discourse. So they're not bringing in the more feminine pieces, the relational, the care. And care, when it's brought in, is a duty of care, and it's brought in as maybe laws and as regulations, but it's not brought in where feminists understand it, like Nell Noddings, as a relational care. So it's like, how do those worlds meet? How do we get the masculine and the feminist views to meet, and how do we get those to be acknowledged and brought into the space? Working with the team of researchers, of a wonderful team of researchers and a team of people in EpiSTEM, we worked over the best part of a year, and we brought together a conceptualization of a model of teachers' continuing professional development as that border crossing journey. We want the academy to be in the space with the schools and the teachers to provoke and to challenge and to bring in the evidence and bring in the research into the questions, and to actually have that challenge going on, and to have embedded contradictions and ethical dilemmas, and to welcome it rather than try and ethically cleanse it out and have it just as a formula. I'm delighted my postdoc is here from Vietnam, Vo Van De. Vo is with us. He has done beautiful physics simulations for the Irish curriculum. First time ever they've been done in Ireland. He has written beautiful physics experiments. He's taken the national curriculum of physics and has written written the programs that allow the students to learn their physics through simulations, so they can learn the mechanics and all of that. They can do a lot of the physics experiments online through simulations and find out how they're doing, and have the modern way of actually getting the information from the experiments. So we're delighted that we did a bit of shuffle dancing with Eli Lilly in the last few months, and they're now willing to hold on to him for another postdoc to do the same for the chemistry teachers in Ireland. So social dancing is important. Coming to the last piece of this, the last few days I've had a paper on science teachers' democratic assignment with a colleague, Sarah Tolbert, who was here and gave a guest lecture for us. And Sarah is the Professor of STEM Education now in Monash University in Australia. And just Joanne and myself are never keen to stop what we're doing, and we still like poking the bear, as we say. We like making a new academic contribution to the literature on what is pedagogy, and we're trying to say, well, if it isn't deterministic and it isn't hierarchical and it isn't all of that, then you might say, Geraldine, what is it? So we decided it's more the contours of a map that we are describing, rather than providing clear definitions, that we're going into the contours of a map, because the map has all this, flows out and has edgings and has no end to it. And it is the contours of a map, it's liminal spaces, we're in the betwixt and the between. We have actually the young people growing up. If we're dealing with adolescents, they're going through their adolescent journey. We're trying to teach them the science and mathematics and all the other subjects as well. So there's a liminality going on. And so we produce this productive pedagogy of liminality that's doing very well in the literature now. People are liking it. And it's because we use that complexity theory to actually look at that big ethical question of saying, yes, we want accountability with the teachers. Yes, we want standards, but we don't want standardization or homogenization or reductionism. So how do we keep that dance going and keep that space in the classroom so that we keep the gap between policy and practice, and we secure it into the future, because we have a responsibility to do that. So I will move now to just 3 examples of my academic leadership before I wind up. And those 3 examples are the pleasure and the honour of being Director of EpiSTEM and Professor of STEM Education here in the University of Limerick, to be able to continue the legacy of Professor John O'Donoghue, Professor Merlin Goose and Professor Sybil Ergeran to be able to continue the wonderful work that has been done here and to keep the centre on the map, to support and guide and give help to my colleagues to be able to find their feet in their research, in whatever their journey of research is, because we have a wonderful academy. Everything is beautiful in it because it's all contested and contestable, and that's really exciting to be munching on that as a space. And so to be able to help people find their space is just such a wonderful space to be in. As national convener then of ESAI, I work with a national team. We have about 40 members of this, of critical and feminist researchers, and we're looking at how do we humanise education so that the human is at the centre and that we don't have it all carried away by some algorithmic formula that's going to pull it all off into a space where it's going to be all defined and all enumerated in no time. So in Epistem, not an advert, of course, Michelle, for the podcast or anything, but we use our weekly podcast to get one of our academic colleagues to come on every week and tell us about their research. And I know my dentist listens to it, so that's about all the conversation I've had with her. But so we also have had the voice of teachers and students. And so we've got lots of voices, and we've had people, international professors on, and we are discussing STEM in the broadest possible way, broad and deep, and bringing on everybody and trying to get at those, poking those big questions. And to keep the questions flowing is important for the future. I wanted, because it had such a great reputation for maths education and for science education when I was handed it, I thought, well, I definitely need to bring in my engineering and technology friends and colleagues, because we have a wonderful space of engineering and technology here in the School of Education, and we have wonderful colleagues, engineers and scientists and mathematics people who work with us. So we have a great community here in UL, across border crossing all of those subject areas, and I need to bring them in and have them in the space and keep it as broad, as deep as we can, so that we have the next generation of STEM educators and researchers who take this away, and they'll be able to make their space with it. So the special interest group I'm working with, I suppose we're on the audacity spectrum, we're calling ourselves, because we want to be bold and brave, and we want to say to the policymakers, look, we're good on social psychology, we're good with all that, we're not having a problem with the pipeline of talent, you're all great, it's lovely, but there's more to it than that, and we've got to be careful that we don't lose the human and the human out of it. And I remember Hannah Arendt in one of her books on totalitarianism saying that we only had to do two things to really get totalitarianism secured, and one was to deny the plurality of the human condition, and the other one was to actually kill joy. And you'd kill joy if you made everything very serious and everything about your life had to be brought into a number. If you really would kill joy. So we have to resist anyone that tries to tell us that they can reduce education down to something minimal. And I'm enjoying my European work. They haven't got rid of me yet. They've invited me to Bonn at the end of January. Whether I'm going to get a roasting or not, I don't know. But I'm still enjoying bringing up the philosophy and saying, look, we need to keep with the big questions, the purposes of education. The human subjectivity as persons is important, just as important as our role to be a worker in a future life, to be a citizen in a vibrant society, to be a citizen in a decent society like Ireland that has a love of community and will not want to give away its democracy or its love of community so easily. So it's wonderful to be able to fight in that space. So I think before we land, you keep on the safety belts for a minute. The latest chapter I've written in the last few days is in a book called Light a Fire and Watch It Burn, and it is disruptive qualitative methods in education, because we're working with feminist theorists around the world and decolonial theories and studies. We are looking at, we do need new ways of thinking about education and research and how we search and research, frame and reframe problems. And the third wave of feminism is actually about examining the framing of a problem. Because generally when a problem is presented to you, it's already in a problem, because it's the framing of it will mean something else won't get into the ether. So you've got to examine the framing of a problem. So if somebody tells you, let's say dignity and respect, and that can be just a problem of the individual, well, it surely isn't, because it's a cultural problem which is bigger than the both of us and bigger than all of us. So a lot of these problems are bigger, and there's a danger nowadays of us collapsing them down into being just too narrow a problem. So you're very kind and generous to listen to me for so long, so I'm going to wind up and say we're going to land now in over the Shannon onto the Living Bridge, but I do need some scholar in UL to take the Living Bridge very seriously. I need a book on it, I need the history of it, I need everything about it, because the best STEM project we've done here. It is a London School of Architecture designed it. It was engineers from the engineering from, I think the Eiffel Tower had some little hand in it. There was a lot of people with great brains involved in the Living Bridge, because it has public spaces, spaces of recreation, spaces for well-being, and it was brought in just before the crash. It landed beautifully in and was clipped together so lovely before 2007, before the crash came. Now, I think of the Living Bridge as a metaphor in the University of Limerick for a humanising education. I always walk my students down to the end of it in twos. I say to them, one be the speaker and one be the listener. Go down to the end of it and find out everything you can on this person. Come back with some bit of gossip. I want a bit of gossip. I don't need to know just where they're from. Find out a bit of something about them, and then come back and turn around and come back, and you then the other person, and then come back into class and introduce each other and tell us a little bit about where you come from. So this Living Bridge that we have in the University of Limerick is a huge metaphor for me of a humanising education that I've got here from you and working with you. And so today is a celebration for me, but it is for me to thank all of you as well for showing up today, for listening to me and for being with me, and working in that space for care and justice in contemporary times, and knowing that the questions we're dealing with haven't ended, and in fact they're getting more complex, but that's wonderful. Bring them on and let's debate them, and let's have understanding of the ethical values that we carry with us, the wisdom of that, and the humanising influences and the people who've helped me along the way. And there's just so many, too numerous to actually thank, is all I can say. Now, word has come in. I have finished my lecture. You can unbuckle. There is word has come in, and the word on the street is that this fellow is calling to you. Whether you're good or whether you're bad, he'll be calling. So Santi will be coming. Thank you very much.